So now, guys, we want to continue with the other special senses and also the general senses as well. So let's look at the other special senses. Now, there are two other special senses. One is for the sense of smell and the other for taste. So let's look at the sense of smell first. The sense of smell is also called olfaction. Let me write this down. Olfaction. Now, there isn't much to review for the sense of smell, for the practical. It is possible that they could have a figure, right? A figure that shows part of the head, a dissected model of the head, right? Where they show the nasal cavity. So when we discuss the sense of olfaction, we will focus around that part of the face known as the nasal cavity. Now here's a picture you can see of the nasal cavity. Let me get my highlighter. Highlight the word olfaction. So we can see here in the nasal cavity, right? So nasal cavity is probably too easy. They don't usually ask for just nasal cavity. But what we do have inside the nasal cavity is a couple of important things. So let's look inside the nasal cavity. Now you can see this person is sniffing, right? Is sniffing some odorants, right? Odorants that are in the air. Perhaps good smelling odorants. Now there are also bad smelling odorants, like when you go on the subway station, right? Or sometimes you go in a very dirty cab. It stinks, right? It smells bad. There are all different kinds of odorants. But however, let's imagine some delicious odorant. Maybe, you know, chocolate cake or whatever is your favorite cake or dessert. Or you're going by a pizzeria. You could smell the fresh pizza from their ovens, right? That smells good to me. Another smell that I like is fresh paint when they just painted walls. Whatever is your, you know, one of your favorite smells, just imagine that you're sniffing it. And those odorants, right, you inhale them through your nasal cavity. Now, as they come into your nasal cavity, right, those odorants and the air that you breathe in with your nose spins around. It spins around in your nasal cavity. Let me show you with an arrow here. Let me get a blue arrow here and maybe make this just a little bit thinner. So when you sniff in here, your ear, the air comes around like this, and you see how it spins around. Okay? Yes, very good, Melissa. You remember from 203, from respiratory system, right? Those things that spin around the air as they come into your nasal cavity, right? By the way, spinning around the air as it comes into your nose, like a vent does, is called turbinates. So the air that you breathe into your nasal cavity turbinates. It spins around. It turbinates. Now, that's not important here for the lab practical exam. But what is important are the things that make the air spin around as it comes in. And what's important here are those things that you see there that are called the nasal concha. Let me highlight nasal concha. The nasal concha. Remember you studied nasal concha in 203? You actually have three sets of nasal concha. The upper one, the middle one, and the inferior one, right? The upper one is tiny, it's way above there. But you have two other larger ones in the middle and inferiorly, okay? Those nasal concha, right, they have right there a space, right, a groove. The groove is called nasal myitis. Let me highlight those, or actually let me write it down. So the word myitis is not written here, but I'm going to include it here on the figure. Nasal myitis, right? Nasal myitis. Oops. Just want to fix this a little. Okay. And make this just a little smaller so that we can fit in. Okay. And then get a marker here and point at it. So the myitis are the grooves. The grooves are the space that's underneath the concha. Let me get a black marker to point at them. Okay, so you see a groove? They kind of act like vents. Let me get another one here. So those nasal concha and myitis are the grooves that are underneath the concha. Okay, just like a vent has. A vent has a metal or plastic thing, like a plastic piece, and under it there's a groove, right? A space, right? which you have to constantly clean out with a duster or a brush. Anyway, those grooves and those concha are what cause the air to spin around in your nasal cavity. So that allows for the rinse to remain in your nose a little longer. That allows for the odorants to stay a little longer in your nasal cavity and perceive the different smells that it contains. Now the smell is perceived by what you have right there at the top of your nasal cavity. And way at the top of your nasal cavity, you see there a special mucosa or epithelium. We call it the olfactory epithelium. If you look at the figure here, that would be this area that I'm highlighting sort of yellow colored. Okay? The olfactory epithelium. If you look more closely at the figure B, you see the olfactory epithelium consists of cells, special sort of bipolar cells, right? The bipolar cells that you have here for smelling, right? Those are olfactory neurons, which perceive the odorants. So the specific cells, the specific area that perceives the odorants, to smell them and perceive them and interpret them by your brain, like for instance, oh, that smells like fresh coffee, or that's cake, okay? That's because of what you have here in the roof of your nasal cavity. So way up there in the roof of your nasal cavity, you have there the olfactory epithelium. Okay, the olfactory epithelium, okay? Any questions about some of these few structures here associated with the sense of smell? So that will be the only few things that you have to know here for the sense of olfaction. Okay, the nasal concha and the myiaticis, the olfactory epithelium, and nasal cavity. I doubt they ask that. I've never seen them ask nasal cavity, but they do ask for these few specific things. Do you have to worry about the cells? Do you have to worry about the microscope slide? No. Don't worry about the microscope slide for the sense of smell. Okay, but we will discuss this though. We will probably look at these figures here in lecture class and explain the sense of smell more deeply. All right, no questions at the moment. Okay, one thing I do want to remind you is when you review your cranial nerves, remember the nerve involved for the sense of smell, right? It's called the olfactory nerve. We already saw that, so I'll highlight that as well. The olfactory nerve, also called the olfactory tract. You can identify it as either way, olfactory nerve or olfactory tract. This is perhaps one nerve that could be called either way. And then the olfactory bulb, so I'll highlight that as well, the olfactory bulb. The olfactory bulb, that's at the very tip of the olfactory tract. So at the tip there you have like a bulb-like area, which you can see here on the figure as well, on the figure A or figure B. Okay? So there's a few other things here you can add to your list for the sense of smell. Okay? Okay, any questions about the sense of smell? And then we want to move on to one last special sense. One last special sense. Now, touch is not a special sense. Touch is a general sense. But the last special sense we want to look at is gustation. What is gustation? Taste. Very good, Melissa. Taste. So let me write this last sense here. The sense of taste. Okay. Gustation. Oops, for some reason it's not writing anything down. Let me try again. Okay. Okay, so gustation. Let's take a look at this important sense. Now, there's not much for gustation either. If there was any models or pictures, they would most likely be a picture of the head again. Once again, a picture of the head or a section of the head specifically focused around the mouth. This is where you mainly identify gustation, around the mouth, right? In fact, in the mouth. So one important organ that we have in the mouth, the most important organ here for the sense of taste, is your tongue. So let me underline or highlight the word tongue. So for gustation, right, sense of taste, we want to look at the tongue. Now, There are many things here associated with the word gustation, like gustatory cells, gustatory pores, and so forth. So when you hear the word gustatory, it's referring to taste. However, what you see here in the figure is a figure of the tongue, and on the surface of your tongue you have these important projections, different shapes of projections. The projections that you have there on your tongue are called the lingual papilla. You see where they see papilla there? The different types of papilla. You have there some that look round like little donuts. You have some that look sharp like knives or leaves. You have some that look like little mushrooms. They're called fungiform. Anyway, you have different types of papilla. So you don't have to worry about naming the different types of papilla. You have different shapes and sizes and types of papilla. In general, we will just call them lingual papilla. Lingual papilla. Now, somebody's asking, what about the figure there for the taste buds? Yes, briefly look at the figure for the taste bud. Okay? And you're looking into all section there, into the small section of a papilla. These again are called the lingual papilla. So again, no need to identify the specific types of lingual papilla, but we'll just say in general the lingual papilla. So we'll highlight that word as well. And you have varieties of types, right? Some that look round, some that are sharp and pointy, and so on. But what you want to look at is that the papilla, you see the papilla here with figure B? If you take a papilla, you look inside, you have these smaller structures there. They're called the taste buds. Now, when you look at taste buds, there's no model for taste buds, by the way. There's no model for taste buds, but perhaps with a microscope figure. So the only thing I would probably add to the list would be the taste bud microscope slide. The taste bud. And you see right there, when you see something that looks kind of rounded like that, rounded like this, with a group of cells bundled together like this, and they kind of come together there at a taste pore, okay, that would be called your taste bud. Okay, I think that would probably be as much as you need to review here for the mouth, for the sense of taste, which is the tongue, the lingual papilla, and maybe a microscope slide of the taste bud. Not much. One thing though I do want to review with you quickly is perhaps something that might be useful for your next quiz, right? Your second quiz, which is the nerves that innervate the tongue for taste. The nerves that innervate the tongue for taste and also sensation. You can feel things on your tongue, right? When you feel something like a spoon on your tongue, you feel water on your tongue, you feel your tongue dry or your tongue hot from hot coffee. You feel different sensations, right? Those are different general senses. However, one important sense that you can feel with the tongue is a special sense, right? The sense of gustation. So let me get a marker here and separate my tongue. Let me see if I can even use some dotted lines. Well, actually just make the lines somewhat dotted here. Okay, so I put some lines there, as you can see. Okay, the anterior 2/3 of your tongue can taste and feel things through one specific nerve. What is the specific nerve that can sense and taste things with the anterior 2/3? Not the hypoglossal. The hypoglossal is mainly for feeling, like in your throat and sensations. But with the anterior 2/3 of your tongue, the anterior 2/3 of your tongue can feel and taste things with your facial nerve. Facial nerve, guys. Facial nerve. Look at your review list there for the cranial nerves, okay? Facial. I'm going to put facial nerve, just to abbreviate. As facial N for facial nerve. Okay. The posterior third of your tongue. That one you are correct. So those of you who said the other nerve were correct. So the posterior 1/3 of your tongue is to a different nerve. What nerve would that be of the many that you mentioned? the ninth nerve, and which is the ninth nerve, Dargiel? Now that Dargiel said the ninth nerve, now you should be able to know which one that is. The posterior third of your tongue is through the glossopharyngeal nerve, the ninth cranial nerve. Okay, so you have two nerves important for tasting with your tongue. When you taste things with the anterior third of your tongue, for instance, you're licking at a lollipop or you're licking ice cream. You tasted it with the facial nerve. When you taste with the posterior part of the tongue, such as when you're swallowing foods, and now you feel the good taste on the back of your tongue, that's the glossopharyngeal nerve. Okay, very good. So those are the two nerves important for tasting. By the way, the students who said hypoglossal is for movement of your throat muscles and also your tongue muscle, movement of it for swallowing. So not for tasting, but rather for swallowing. Okay, any questions? Just a matter of review. By the way, there's a figure here. Here, if you still mix them up, here's a nice figure. See this figure? The two main nerves for tasting with your tongue, facial and glossopharyngeal nerve. We'll talk about this in lecture class more specifically. Okay, questions about olfaction or gustation? Any questions? Okay, now lastly, I want to look at one last sense. It's not a special sense. So what are the other senses besides the special senses? What are the other senses besides the special senses? What is that other category called? Yes, very good. The general senses. Now, for the general senses, there is a figure in chapter 13 of the textbook. Okay? In Unit 15 of your lab manual, there is no figure. There is no figure in Unit 15 for the skin. So when we talk the general senses, we want to probably look at a figure of the skin. There will be a skin model like this where you have to identify a few things. But in your lab manual, you may use chapter 6. If you have your lab manual, turn to chapters or Unit 6, page 139. Page 139. Those of you following me with the textbook, I'll use chapter 5 of the textbook, a figure like this. I like this figure more than what we have here in chapter 13. Chapter 13 has here the important receptors here for sensations. But I like this figure more because it has a completer picture of your skin. So now, those of you using your lab manual, Unit 6 on page 139 has a figure similar to this. And for those of you with the textbook, like I am using, let's use chapter 5. So I'm going to use chapter 5, figure 5.1. This is something that we discussed in 203 when we learned about the skin. So I'll use this again. So we'll use actually another chapter here for these general senses. Now, the general senses, right, is what perceives touch, pressure, vibration, stretch, and temperature. Yes, very good. Temperature and pain. These are some of the major general senses. Let me see if I have that labeled here with some of the tables here. So figure 1312 here of chapter 13 has some of the specific receptors here which discriminate some of these things like touch, right, stretch, vibration, pressure, pain, and so on. So all those things are perceived as being general senses. One important organ used to perceive these general senses is your skin. Now, can your organs feel these things as well? Of course. Your mouth, right? The mucosa of your mouth can feel these different sensations like temperature, pressure, touch, and so forth. Or your tongue. Your tongue can also feel touch. Just touch your tongue. Tickle your tongue. Okay? Put pressure on your tongue. Okay? So you do feel with other organs and these general senses. But one important organ that we feel it here that will be used on the exam will be a section of the skin like this. Now, here we can see and appreciate with the section of the skin that you want to go over some of the other things of the skin. I know that skin was already studied in 203, such as, for instance, you learned about the epidermis, you learned about the glands of your skin, like the glands that we have in the dermis, the salivary glands, not salivary, I'm sorry, sweat glands, the sebaceous glands that produce oil, and so forth. So review those other things that you already know about from 203. They are sometimes asked on the practical. Why? Because they are part of your skin, and your skin is a cutaneous sensory organ. Right? So for cutaneous sensation, we have a lot of other things here. But we do have some couple of new things. So review these other things. I did include them on your review list, right? Such as the epidermis. What's the epidermis? What's the dermis? The dermal papilla. The dermal papilla are these waves that you see here on the of the dermis, like little wave-like areas there. Other things that you have there, like the hair follicles, the erector pili muscle, and the glands, and so forth. Hypodermis. Hypodermis is not part of the skin, but you want to quickly review it as well. Hypodermis is actually mostly fatty tissue, right? It is subcutaneous. It's not one of the layers of your skin, but it's often studied along with the skin. But what's important here, new to learn today, for the skin, for the general senses, are some of these special receptors. Now with the model, with the figures that we may learn about in lecture class, we have different receptors here. You can see, like, for instance, the Merkel cells or the Ruffini endons and so forth. But with the model that we will use, and that you may be asked on the exam, you have two major types of receptors here. One receptor is the one that you see here in the dermal papilla. So let's look in the dermal papilla. Let me get a pointer here. And you see within the dermal papilla, these sort of wavy areas here contain, what you see right there, a unique and special type of receptor for sensation, right? For sensing touch, temperature, pressure, vibration, and so forth. That receptor that you have there specifically are known as the Meissner's corpuscle or tactile corpuscle. Let me label it. If you have the lab manual, it has it already labeled. Here with this figure, you can see it labeled there, tactile corpuscle. So going back to my better figure right here, it's not labeled here, but I'll label it for you. And we call those the tactile or Meissner corpuscles. Let me write the other word here. Meissner, it's spelled Meissner, but I think it's pronounced Meissner after scientists who discovered them. Meissner's corpuscles, also called tactile corpuscle. Let me move my arrow away. Okay? So you see those Meissner corpuscles? They're sensitive to very light touch and light vibration and temperature as well. Okay? So when you feel things, like just right now, everybody try this. Caress the back of your hand lightly. Caress the back of your hand very lightly. It kind of almost tickles. Caress the palm of your hand lightly. Almost like it kind of tickles because it's very lightly. But anyway, you're caressing the back of your hand very lightly, almost like hovering over your skin. That's being sensed through these Meissner's corpuscles. Okay? By the way, Professor Meissner discovered many things. So there are many things named after Professor Meissner, like the Meissner corpuscles, the Meissner cells. What else have you seen that's called Meissner? Maybe you remember a few other things called Meissner. Anyway, we will get to them perhaps. I don't think there's a Meissner muscle. I'm not sure about that. But yes, Professor Meissner discovered a lot of things. Anyway, the other important corpuscle here, or receptor ending, are the one that you see there at the bottom. You see where it says lamellated corpuscle? The lamellated corpuscle. Those are the ones that are deeper in your dermis, or sometimes as deep as within the hypodermis as well. So it might be sometimes here deep in the dermis or even touching the hypodermis. Anyways, you can see it's deeper in your skin. We call those lamellated corpuscles. The lamellated corpuscles have a second name as well. They're called Pacinian corpuscles as well. Pacinian corpuscle. Okay, so that's a second name, another name that you could use, a synonym for the lamellated corpuscle. As you can see right there, that looks kind of lamellated, like it has layers. It's kind of circular, rounded, and that's much larger than the other corpuscle. The lamellated or Pacinian corpuscle is sensitive to deeper touch, pressure, deep vibration, and so on. Okay, let's now activate our lamellated corpuscles. Now, once again, take one of your fingers or one of your hands, and now put it over, like with one or two fingers, put it over the back of your other hand, or on your palm, wherever you prefer. I'm doing it on the back of my hand. Now poke deeper. Poke more deeper, or scratch more deeply. Okay, poke in it. Pinch it. Even try to pinch it. You feel that? That's through the Pacinian corpuscle. So for touch, pressure, vibrations, okay, is being felt. Even pain might be felt through these lamellated corpuscles. Okay, those are the two corpuscles that you may be asked about on the practical. The other corpuscles we will discuss perhaps in lecture class, like the Ruffini ones, the Merkel cells, and so forth. But these other two, the tactile and the lamellated corpuscles, are the ones that we will discuss here for lab class. I never seen them ask about the other ones because the model doesn't even show them. But the model does show these two types. Questions? Any questions for cutaneous sensation? Any questions about skin? For skin, you want to review the other things as well, right? For instance, the glands, the hair follicles. How to identify the sebaceous gland versus the sweat gland. The sweat glands usually look like this, and they're independently, right? They independently, most often, not always, but most often, they come like this directly to the surface of your skin through a pore, through the surface of your skin through a duct of its own. There are a few sebaceous glands, not many, but a few, sweat glands. A few sweat glands might connect into the hair follicles. But in the hair follicles, we mainly have these, the sebaceous glands. So the sebaceous glands are the ones that most often connect into the hair follicle, while the sweat glands are more independent, like this. Independent, and they come through a duct directly to the surface of your skin. Any questions about these few other structures besides the corpuscles? Questions? Okay. Not for now. All right, great. So, I think that would cover, let me see if I have anything else I'm missing. That would cover most what's important for your practical exam. Okay?